We're going to begin. The first source on the page is in the heart of Parshat Beha'alotekha, which Ella just read so beautifully. You shouldn't read this part, but we are in the heart of the book of Numbers, and we are still in the part of the book in which we are recounting the specific duties of the different priestly classes and subclasses. So we're going to look at a set of verses in the 8th chapter of Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 8, starting with verse 24. If you want to look at the context, you can find it on page 819 in the Chumash. And starting from verse 24, Zot asher Leviim. This is what when we hear Zot in Bamidbar or in Vayikra, what does Zot usually refer to? I'll give you a hint. We often see it as Zot Chukat. This is the policy, the law, the thing that we've got to follow. So Zot, this is what we teach you regarding the Leviim. Mi bein 5 ו-20 shana v'mala yavo litzvot tzava ba'avodat ohel moed. So, from the age of, what age do they start at?
25.
25 years of age, they should engage in the avodah, in the sacred work of service that takes place where? In the Ohel Moed. Right, okay. So then we get the end bracket for their life of service. Umi ben 50 shana yashuv mitzvah ha'avodah velo ya'avod od. And from the age of 50 years old, 50, great. I want to give you a chance because people know their Hebrew number sometimes, okay? And then yashuv, they should, what does that mean? Does it mean to literally return? What does that mean? Go back or retire, right? It's as if somebody was in active service and then they're returning from that active service duty. So yeshuv, they should go back and they should basically not work anymore. Lo ya'avod od. They should not do that sacred duty anymore. Finally, we hear a little bit about what retirement looks like for the Leviim, okay? Next verse. V'sheret et echav be'ohel moed lishmor mishmeret va'avodah lo ya'avod kacha ta'aseh leviim b'mishmerotam. Those last few words are just a coda on the explanation. They're just saying this is what you should do with the work. But the meat of that sentence is very interesting. What does v'sheret et echav be'ohel moed mean? They should do some sort of another kind of service. It's not the same word as avodah, but they should do something. They're what are they doing with their brothers? It kind of tells us it's a type of lishmor mishmeret. What is shmira like at camp? People grew up going to a Jewish camp or send their kids there. Guard duty. Shmira is that the best or the worst job?
Yeah.
Depends who's on with you, right? Shmira, nice and late at night. That's what I learned at Ramah, Wisconsin, summer 2010. I had some good nights. So they're supposed to sort of, it's a duplicative, like Everett Fox probably translates this very beautifully. They should guard, yes, guard. They should do some sort of a guardianship. What sort of a guardianship might a 55-year-old give to a 27-year-old in the world of the Levites? First of all, before you answer that question, what was their avodah? What was the avodah of the Levites in the Ohel Moed?
They were in charge of the washing.
So they're in charge of the washing, the basins, and the purification. And ultimately, what do we learn that the Leviim are going to be doing in the place which God is going to choose and which we learn about post the 5 books? What do the Leviim do as a class? They're the chazans. They're the singers. They're the ones who are in charge of singing. Okay, so they've got this duty. So just to be very clear, it kind of looks like, notice the word litzvot tzava, there's a lot of duplicatives in here, very poetic. They should do some sort of a service. What does that word hint at? That Sadi Bet Aleph. It sounds like military service. But what I was thinking about when I was reading this verse is we've had a handful of shinshinim, of kids from Israel who, when they reach the age of graduating, they graduate out of their high school career and they would be ready to be conscripted in service. They come and they live in the United States as a like matter of foreign service. Lovely, energetic. Some of you know my husband teaches immersive Hebrew at Lashon Academy, which is a Hebrew charter language school that has 4 campuses in Los Angeles. And they don't do anything religious. It's completely about Hebrew language there, but even they get shinshinim. Not all shinshinim, as I've learned, because we've had some living in our home and he works with them, not everybody is going to go back and serve on the front lines or serve in a tank. What else do Israelis do during service? What other types of service exist? Right, there's medical service. What's that? Logistics. So we've got people in intelligence, logistics, engineering, maintenance. And there's also national service. There's also the notion that those who are medically not qualified or whose families might otherwise religiously object to them being in active duty in combat environment will have them doing other service. Right. So if you've lost a sibling in war, stunning story. If you've lost a sibling in war in Israel, if your parent, and ultimately, if parents have lost a child, none of their other children are thereafter required to serve an active combat duty. That being said, who here has gone to the exhibit, Redefining Zionism by Shlomit Bard? Has anyone here got a chance to see it? I think it's there for like 5 more days. Go and check it out on UCLA Hillel's building on UCLA's campus. And there's a stunning story of a family. I can't remember if this is a story related to the Druze family or a second one, but there's a son and his mother. They'd already lost a child, and despite that, post October 7th, he chose this other son who is depicted there to serve in active duty because he wanted to serve his country in Israel. So you can opt into it, but you're patur, you're absolved of that duty.
They have to say an active combat duty. They have to serve an active duty.
Right, they have to serve an active duty, but not an active combat duty, right? Not one that would likely endanger their life. That's the principle at play, is that the parents have already lost a child, but you can choose to do so. He was on the front lines doing combat duty post October 7th, as so many people chose to do from reserves, et cetera, and are still choosing every day. I bring this up because I want us to imagine that it was military-esque in the service part of it. In part, what else in this paragraph do you notice so far seems very similar to the military? What about the qualifications of people? What qualifications do we learn people have? First of all, they have to be a Levi. They have to be a Levite, and that's an inherited position. That's a matter of your family tree. You don't just get to opt into being a Levite. You're a Levite because your dad was a Levite. That's Jewish joke number like 763. You're a Levite if your dad was a Levite. But what else is the qualifier here? Right, Chamesh V'Esrim Shana, 25. You want to see something really crazy? Who remembers from 2 parshas ago? Go back to page 782. The other direction, yeah. Will someone read? Is somebody willing to read the section? So start at the bottom on chapter 4.
וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, נשאו את ראש בני קהת מתוך בני לוי למשפחותם לבית אבותם.
Okay, so pause there for a second. So they're going to take a census, and naso, the same word that we used in the parsha this morning and last Saturday afternoon, that they're going to take a census of this part of the Kohanitic descendancy, the Kahat, the family Kahat, Bnei Kahat, and they're going to count them per their house, the Beit Avotam. Okay, keep going.
מבין 30 שנה, from 30 years, ומעלה ועד בין 50 שנה, until 50 years, כל בעל צבא, that word again, לעשות מלאכה באוהל מועד.
Great. So after 30 years, they can serve, and then they can no longer serve after 50. Now, that's not an unusual thing that some sort of either military, or we're going to call it service writ large, right? We're thinking about service expansively, that there would be an age bracket within which you can serve. This is true in congressional life in America. This is true in a lot of places, that there's a bracket, although there's not always an end age bracket, retirement age. We'll get back to that retirement in a minute. But what's weird about the comparison of these two texts? 30 versus 25. There are some, we don't have time to go through them, some in Mikra Okadolo who will try to parse that 25 applied to some and 30 applied to others. But what's the more likely explanation? Okay, that's very funny. That's not what I was going to say. Rabbi Bearmom said they needed more people. They lowered the age. That's very possible. And I mean, you know, in times of stress and war, that makes sense. I was going to say the most likely reason is that there are multiple authors whose versions of this story are being incorporated and quilted together in this narrative. But, you know, Rabbi Bearmom was both funnier and truer to Moshe, something being read to Moshe at Sinai. Yes, Alan.
This is a little different because you're dealing specific not just with Levites, but with a subset of them, the Kohathites. And because of that, and because they're dealing with, one of their job is to deal with the tent of meeting, with the sacred objects in the tent of meeting, it could be that they need to be 5 years older. And there's, in this week's Parsha, there was talk about, there's another group. It's not just the Kohathites, but there's another group, and they're talking about they're treated differently in what's taking place, even though they're both Levites. So I think this is just the Levites, and then there's subdivisions below that, which I think may account for the difference.
Okay, the great and sacred commentator Alan Broidy, in mild apologeticism, but in a good and important and strongly textually supported way, says, well, this is about a subset of people who have a very particular job. The class that they belong to have to deal with certain things. It would be to strike a comparison. If you're going to be serving in this particular intelligence branch or this particular kind of combat, the age is not 25, it's 30. There are lots of reasons one might argue against that, like it would be odd for the age to be lowered later and not raised later, to get more specific and more constricted in terms of the requirements. That being said, what's really interesting about this text, to get back to our text for this coming week from Parshat Beha'alotekha, it's at the top of 8:17 again, or if you're following along in text number 1. The other thing that's interesting about this text is not just the starting age, it's the ending age. They can serve only until age 50, and then I started to ask a question but backed up. Let's come back to that question. What does the retirement look like for these 50-plus-year-old Levites who are now helping out with some sort of shmirah of their brethren who are doing this work? What could that be? What's that?
Making them apprentices.
Okay, making them apprentices. So they're, anybody here ever have that experience where they go and they take a job in a field, and the best experience that they have is when somebody who's been there for 25 or 30 years longer than they have shows them the way to do it? Anyone ever had a boss, a mentor, a supervisor, right? It's a way of venerating experience, but it's also deeply practical, because if you're starting fresh with brand new techniques and ideas every time, then you're losing all of the accumulated and acquired knowledge of 25 plus years of service of the older people at work. What are some other reasons to utilize retirees from the Levite service in order to let's not say in order to, what's another reason to utilize those retirees in the workplace of the Levi'im? What's another benefit of that? Let's have Brian and then Alan, and if you're comfortable with using the microphone, then if you could use the microphone, that'd be great. So starting with Brian.
I was just going to say, in Torah, there are various calamities that happen to the children of Israel. Korach, his whole entire family gets swallowed up. So there's a whole bunch of sons of Levi who get swallowed up. So if people are getting swallowed up and there are all these people dying off, then having some retirees who know the ropes already to jump in makes more sense.
Okay, so
that's the
tragically
Watsonian answer.
Right. Tragically, it's possible that you could wind up, it's like lahavdil, but it's like kind of an interesting comparison that's coming to mind is, if you lose an entire a flight of space engineers, like if you'd only trained up a younger group of people to go on a mission and that mission fails, or God forbid something happens to that particular shuttle, which we know is historically, unfortunately, a reality, you're not starting over. You have the people who have been supervising it, who have been there longer, some sort of a situation like that, but with Levites. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah. Well, I think it involves a sense of what the people 50 and over are doing, that they're not doing any physical labor. They may be deemed too old to do that, but people at 50 or at 60 could continue to be a guard without any problem. They could be on the lookout, make sure no one comes into the tent of meeting without consent or without supposed to being there. So I think that it can work for the older people. They're just not doing more strenuous labor, where in terms of putting things together or fixing things, they're just there to stand and watch.
So responding to the physical realities of someone's body at 50, and remember that like 80 is the new 50 in 2025. This is a different reality. We'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. Alan, while you have the microphone, do you think there's any benefit to this situation for the retirees, for those who are no longer in active service, but they're in Shmirah?
I can see benefits for that. It gives them something to do, and they want to be able to participate in their being with their fellow Levites for what they're doing.
Great. So it's giving them something to do. It is, who doesn't want to have a great docket of stuff to do upon their retirement? This is one option for them. Anyone else also want to answer that question? What might be the benefit to those who are over the age of 50 who still get to serve in some sort of a shmirah? So respect for experience. So we're going to put you in that position because we know you know what you're doing. And we trust you to keep your eye out. And you've earned that position, right? You've earned sitting down at the doorway. I had a doorman. Once I lived in a building that had a doorman all my time in New York. And I have a doorman who I think of in that regard. Like, this guy clearly had been running packages and taking care of things. And now his job, he got to sit, like he like earned the sitting. I think there's a certain honor to that because you just know that they have a watchful eye. They can see out of the corner of their eye what's going on, and we trust them with anything, and they've earned that. Okay, any other responses to that? I want to move on to a different rabbinic notion, and this is an idea that emerges probably like we see it first emerge early during temple times, but the first time that we have it recorded for sure is after the destruction of the second temple. So we don't have exact dating of this teaching, but what we know is that in this inherited tradition, Pirkei Avot, which I know that some of you have gotten a chance to study over the last few weeks when the rabbis deigned to teach from Pirkei Avot, and you can find it if you'd like to follow along on page 257 in Sidor Lev Shalem, but I also put the teaching as text number 2 on the sheet. There is a notion that is already alive in the time of the earliest rabbinic voices in the Mishnah, that there are certain tasks designated for certain ages and certain ages that seem to be associated with certain tasks and also with what I'll call like life themes. Where are you in life? Would somebody volunteer to read what might be a very familiar Mishnah to some? It's on, again, it's on page 257, or you can read source 2. Will you pass the microphone to Joey, please? You can read in Hebrew, English, or both.
Okay. Yehuda ben Tema used to say 5 years is the age for the study of Scripture, 10 is the age for the study of Mishnah, 13 is the age for observing the commandments, 15 is the age for the study of Talmud, 18 is the age for the wedding canopy, chuppah, 20 is the age for pursuit, 30 is the age for full strength, 40 is the age for understanding, 50 is the age for giving counsel, 60 is the age for mature age, 70 is the age for a hoary beard, 80 is the age for superadded strength, 90 is the age for a bending stature, 100 is the age at which one is as if dead, passed away, and ceased from the world.
Optimistic, a real solid, positive ending there.
Yeah.
let's note some ways in which we still see these exact ages reflected even today in 2025, 57, 85. Some of these things have still stuck. What are some examples in this paragraph that still resonate age-wise?
Question is, someone who's of the age of the hoary head, what the hell is that?
It likely means for the turning of the hair to a more mature color.
Has occurred, and that is nothing worse.
Okay, great. Let's do Diego and then Alan. Yeah.
Well, the obvious one is 13 B'nai Mitzvah.
Great. The obvious one is bar mitzvah. And we actually have at least 250 years of history in which, going back from now, meaning we for the past 250 years at least, have celebrated bar mitzvah as in a way that's similar to what we do now, meaning we find a date on which we celebrate that a young man is eligible to take a leadership role in the community and then honor him with some sort of a celebration in that way. We don't know. I'm sure some historian knows very deeply. I don't know the history much longer before that, but I know that we've been acknowledging that a 13-year-old is responsible for mitzvot at the age of 13, and that it gets listed in this paragraph. It's interesting that it might just mean he has to fast on Yom Kippur, or she has to fast on Yom Kippur, but it also might mean that we see them as being at an age of more responsibility. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah. I would go with two. One is 5 for the beginning of the study of Scripture, because I think you start with Bible with Tanakh, more Torah stories than anything else, but that happens. And the other point that I liked is the one that 40 is the age for understanding. That was the rabbinic notion that you couldn't learn certain texts until you turned 40, and I think in certain communities that still applies today, like the Ezekiel dreams of of the chariot of what's going and the visions of God. You can't study that till you're 40 because otherwise you might go astray.
I don't know what you're talking about because I'm so young. So I don't even know what text you're referencing. Or also Kabbalah. That's a generally accepted notion, is that people will not study the Zohar in depth until that age either. Great. I want to mention one other one that stands out to me. Some of you know I mentioned my grandfather often, Alav HaShalom, my grandpa Jules, who grew up in Petersburg, Virginia, just outside of Richmond. He was born in 1915. His elementary school teachers were Civil War veterans. He really saw a different era.
They were veterans of the war between the states. He grew up in St. Peter, near Richmond.
That's correct. The war between the states, he was a real Southern boy. He was born in New York City. He was born in the Lower East Side, and then when he was 3 years old, went to Petersburg. Interestingly, that's the exact same story of my husband was born in the South, and when he was 3 years old, was moved to grow up in Bogota, Colombia. But ultimately, very different upbringings. My grandfather was born in 1915. He lived a long and beautiful life. He lived till almost 103. When he was 100, he came and visited Beth and got to see the place. He met the Bermans, and I remember them having the exchange that I heard my grandfather have many times. Well, Jules, how are you going to get to be 100? Because he was just turning 100, and he would say in his beautiful accent, well, I'm going to get to 99, and then I'm going to be real careful. And he was, and he lived, and it was really wonderful. And he and Abe Berman, also Alav HaShalom, had a great l'chaim together. And they were reminiscing about something that they had both done when they were such younger men at the time, which is that they'd had a second bar mitzvah. When do people tend to have a second bar mitzvah?
83.
Why 83? Everyone said 83. Right, so 70 is considered the time after which it is, if you're starting over in a new lifetime. I hold that at this point, with how long people are living, I think every 13 years you should get another bar mitzvah and a party, or a bat mitzvah and a party. I mean, we will have people easily at, what would that be next, 106? No. It would be 96. Yeah, 96. We have plenty of 96-year-olds who could have a bar bat mitzvah, a second bar bat mitzvah. So some of these notions, what's that?
Third.
A third bar, yes, a second bar mitzvah is what I meant. So a third bat mitzvah at the age of 96, sure. So I'll look forward to my third bat mitzvah. So some of these ages have sustained a sense of meaning that I think make a lot of sense. Some are a little bit less resonant, but it depends on what era you're from. For example, we have 18 as the age at which one goes to chuppah. We were just hearing from Rabbi Berenbaum about the story of Devorah and Jack Kolker, Devorah who passed this last week at the age of 95, and how she and her beloved Jack were 17 years old. That's right. And needed their parents' permission to get married. And I know lots of people who still have living parents and grandparents, or who themselves are alive, who got married at that age. That being said, generally speaking, do we say that 18 is the assumed age for wedding at this time? In the ultra-Orthodox world, very possibly so. But most people who you will meet, we have something that has only been defined, because there are a couple of different names for it, but in child or human development, there's something talked about as emerging adulthood. So over the course of the past 100 to 125 years, we've seen, particularly with the rise in people who are getting university education, but not just that, also people who go into trades or into service, we see that there's an age in life in which it is acceptable to neither be living under the home of your parents or to still be living at home with your parents, but to be relatively independent, but not yet coupled or partnered. And that notion of that extension of time shifts when we're going to imagine somebody going to the chuppah. So there are some things that are absolutely staying mostly the same as the same Mishnah, even within Jewish life, like bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. And there are some things that have changed substantially.
Remember, adolescence in a very real sense is a modern concept. In other words,
Why do you grab that microphone? Because this is a very important point. Yeah.
Adolescence is a modern concept. If you go back 3 generations, virtually everybody's great-grandparents would have gone to work at an age of 13 or 14. And I remember distinctly, I was reading a biography of Nachman of Bratslav, and the author wrote that he had no capacity to deal with the question of adolescence because at 15, Nachman of Bratslav was already the father of 2. Wow. And that was customary and not a statement of maturity, but a statement of being 15.
Sure.
And consequently, he said, none of our categories. And the other thing that is interesting in our time, right now, not in my time, and I'm getting to the years of my strength, but having said that, adolescence now can be defined from 15 to 40.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Wonderful points, Dr. Berenbaum. It's true that we could not conceive of people having this extended period of as many as 25 years of their life in which they would have been entirely independent. And I just want to read that back into our text. And I saw somebody else over here maybe had a comment or a question. Reading that back into the text, I think it's easy when we think 25 years old and we read in this text that was the age at which the Levites went to service, then we might be picturing the 25-year-olds who we know or who we more recently were, depending on who you are sitting around this room. And that's probably not so and not the case. Perhaps at the age of 25, you could be preparing to figure out who your child was going to marry, right, in another 3 years. So it's just a totally different life cycle rhythm. Was there someone else who had a comment or a question?
Oh, I was just going to say, if you're looking at the very end of the section line.
Hang on, Brian. We're going to give you a...
Another age that stands out to me as significant even today is Ben Shishim Lazikna, at the age of 60, elderhood. Mm-hmm. Senior citizens, 60 years old, going all the way back, or 55.
It's AARP claims its biblical and Mishnaic roots, in this whole line of inquiry. Although I tell that they'll start sending you mail at like 42 and be like, don't. You're getting up there. They really want you. So I want us to take a look at a related text that on its surface may or may not seem very closely tied to this text, but I want to tie it in. And I think it's a wonderful tongue-in-cheek teaching that comes from the Talmud, remembering that, in case you're not familiar with this idea, the Talmud is codified as an oral text approximately the year 600. So we're talking about commentary that's coming along several generations later than this Mishnah, which itself is probably a very old teaching and Mishnah. So take a look at text number 3, Tanu Rabbanan, Ezehu mitbashal Yerushalayim. What was the coin of Jerusalem? What do they mean by coin of Jerusalem? What would the coin of Jerusalem have been? It would it have been the shekel?
What was the money of Jerusalem?
Right. What was the money, meaning what was literally on what was the coin? What did it look like? What was the minting of the coin in Jerusalem? Yep. And so this text reads that it was David u'Shlomo mitzad echad. It was David and Shlomo who were our kings, right, the ancient kings on one side, and Ir HaKodesh mitzad acher. What in this case is Ir HaKodesh? So how could Jerusalem be on a coin? How was the city on a coin?
Picture of it.
A depiction of the coin. Here's my question. What did Shlomo and David look like on that coin? What did they think? David and Shlomo. I've been thinking about this ever since I put this text on here. Like, what did they think that David and Shlomo looked like? Because Charles Heston as the model. A little, yeah. A suit, a black hat, a beard. Looks like the Rebbe. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah. It says, at least in the parentheses, the names David and Solomon. It may not necessarily be a picture, could just be their names that are included.
So nice reading of the text. So
But the reason the rabbis have that is because otherwise you would be making an image, and you'd be making an engraved image, which would be
Prohibited by the Ten Commandments.
right.
Making a human image, it would be considered like a sculpture. So on a coin, in that sense, the rabbis were trying to say they adhered to our understanding of what thou shalt not make graven images.
That's right. So I wanted to say that these brackets are in a way an attempt at a correction for something that felt very uncomfortable to the rabbinic mind, which is this idea of putting imagery of human beings. First of all, how do we know what they looked like? We actually don't have really intense descriptors of those particular people. And second of all, it's problematic to have potentially a graven image, and they're literally an engraved image, and therefore it's more comfortable for us to imagine that it was the names that were on the coins, but the text itself doesn't necessarily specify that. It's just bracketed. And then we get another teaching that immediately follows, and this is where we'll close on our teaching tonight. It says, what about the coin of Avraham Avinu? Zaken v'zikna mitzad echad, an old man and an old woman on one side, uvechor uvetula, kids of a marriageable age, young, not adolescents, right, because it didn't exist, but young marriageably aged kids on the other side. One side of the coin, old man, old woman. Other side of the coin, young man and young woman. I've got a teaching that is just my own chap on this idea. It's my own take on this idea, and this is where we're going to land, and I'd love to hear your thoughts later, but I want us to bench and finish out Shabbat. I think that the reason that the text would think that Abraham's coin would have been a different coin like this is to make a point about the ways in which this Mishnah, the teaching of what age applies to particular aspects of how a human being shows up in the world, their strength, and vice versa, right? This idea that we associate certain ages with certain things. The most intense inversion and subversion of that idea are Avraham and Sarah. Avraham and Sarah did not do things at any kind of an expected age. How old was Sarah when she had her first kid? She's 99 when she gets the news that she's pregnant, I think, by my own math, right? So
plus 9 months, 100 years.
Plus 9 months. She's 100 years old. Very good math. Right. absolutely subverts this idea that the age, it doesn't have an age for Leidah in our Mishnah, this age for having children, but Abraham and Sarah were already old when their story began. I love it when I see lists, either published in news or in articles and essays sent around, that are lists of like 50 or 100 people who got their start later in life. I think it's very, very, very important that we both understand that holding standards in a militaristic type sense it's necessary and it's important, and we've been doing it since time immemorial. We always have ages, 25 or 30, one or the other. To 50, that's when you would actually serve. But it's also the eternal truth that 50 for one person is not 50 for another person. People's stories are radically interesting in ways that completely go against what the teachings here would be. There are 9-year-olds who read Torah. I promise I didn't plan that, but I think that that's an interesting thing. Right? I have a 9-year-old daughter who read from the Torah today, and I am blessed to have a parent myself who, well beyond working age, is still working and, thank God, and physically a very healthy shape. And I also know people who did not get a chance to reach what we would call a ripe old age, and whose greatest stories ended young, and surprisingly young. So I want us to both take very seriously these texts, which obviously capture a time in our life when we have a model of the necessary people who, taking your idea, Dr. Berenbaum, like, when you don't have enough people of age, you just need the people who can serve and serve well. You need people of good body strength. Someone else brought that up. You need vigor. You need to be able to serve and be full-bodied. That's all very important. But it's also the case that any given one of us in this room may not match up with that list. And that's not radical. That's traditional.